If you grew up with a Super Nintendo and never played any RPGs on it, were you even really there? In just 4 megabytes, these games delivered stories more emotional than most Hollywood blockbusters. And today, we're diving into 10 RPGs that defined the 16-bit era, with time travel, monster collecting, and some truly wild plot twists packed into those tiny cartridges. Stick around, because even if you think you've played them all, there's probably at least one gem here you missed. Back in the 90s, while most RPGs were sticking to turn-based formulas, Secret of Mana broke away from the pack. It mixed action, strategy, and even co-op in a way that felt years ahead of its time. The story kicks off with a kid who stumbles across a legendary sword, accidentally unleashes an ancient evil, and basically gets kicked out of his village on the spot. From there, things escalate fast, and you end up teaming up with a runaway princess and a mischievous sprite, traveling across the world to restore the mana power and stop an empire from awakening a godlike war machine. Instead of waiting around in menus, you were dodging hits, charging up attacks, and casting spells in real time, all while exploring a massive open world that actually felt alive. One thing that made it stand out even more was the ring command system. Instead of cluttering the screen with menus, everything was tucked into these radial wheels that paused the action without taking you out of the moment. It kept the battles flowing, even when you were juggling spells, items, and weapon switches. For a 16-bit game, that kind of interface felt insanely modern, and it made managing your team way less of a hassle during the heat of combat. But what really set it apart, though, was the 3-player co-op. For anyone lucky enough to have the multi-tap and a couple of friends, Secret of Mana turned into a chaotic and unforgettable experience. One second you were coordinating spells, the next someone accidentally healed the boss. The visuals still hold up surprisingly well. There's something about that bright, hand-painted art style that makes every area feel like it was pulled straight out of a storybook. From lush forests to icy temples, the color palette is bold and memorable. It's the kind of game that still holds up today, not just because of nostalgia, but because it genuinely did things few others dared to try back then. Final Fantasy VI might not have gotten the same global spotlight as its flashy successor, but don't let that fool you. This is Peak 2D RPG, the kind of game that grabs you by the heart and doesn't let go. It blends turn-based combat with the active time battle system in a way that feels fast, strategic, and incredibly satisfying. The world is huge, filled with different cultures, strange tech, ruined empires, and a looming sense of doom that builds with every step. Each character starts with their own unique abilities, but as the game goes on, you can teach them magic and customize their roles depending on how you equip them. It strikes a great balance between individuality and flexibility. Some characters are clearly built for specific roles, but if you want to shake things up and experiment, the game totally lets you do that without punishing you for it. The cast is massive, with real character arcs and emotional payoffs. Each party member feels like they belong to a different genre, yet somehow it all fits. And then there's Kefka, one of the most unhinged villains in gaming. Chaotic, cruel, and dangerously unpredictable. He's not trying to rule the world, he's trying to burn it down just because he can. And that soundtrack? It's not just good for the Super Nintendo, it's genuinely timeless. From quiet piano melodies to full-blown orchestral drama, it pushes the hardware to its absolute limit. The opera scene is still legendary, and the final boss theme could easily pass for something out of a movie. Before Square started leaning heavily into cinematic cutscenes, they told unforgettable stories with pixels and passion. And Final Fantasy VI is a masterclass in how to build a world, make you care, and then break your heart in the best possible way. While most RPGs of the 16-bit era focused on dungeon crawling and saving the world with a chosen hero, Ogre Battle: The March of the Black Queen went in a completely different direction. It dropped you into a full-on war, where every decision carried weight and every battle felt like a turning point in a massive campaign. Instead of controlling just a few heroes, you're managing an entire army. And each squad has its own composition up to 5 fighters, and every choice you make from unit placement to formation can change the outcome of a fight. The game doesn't just test your reflexes, it tests your ability to lead. The scale of the battles is something else. Instead of the traditional turn-based grid, units move in real time across the map and engage in automated battles, where composition and positioning matter more than real-time actions. Your units march across huge maps, clashing with enemy squads in skirmishes that feel more like a living battlefield than a turn-based board game. Sometimes it's smarter to avoid a fight. Sometimes it's better flank from the side, or capture a key location before the enemy reinforces. Also, there's a massive class system, with tons of hidden and advanced roles to unlock, depending on stats, items, and even your moral alignment. And speaking of that, the morality system here is no joke. Your choices, how you fight, what towns you liberate or occupy, it all adds up and pushes the story into completely different directions. There are over 10 possible endings, and getting the best one is far from easy. One of the coolest things is how the game weaves politics and story into the gameplay without ever spelling things out for you. You're not just fighting random battles. You're navigating a civil war, where loyalties shift, factions clash, and the people watching your every move will judge you. Recruit a unit with a shady past or wipe out a town by accident, and it might come back to bite you later. Some characters won't even join you unless you've made certain choices or kept your reputation clean. Most people think of Mario as the guy who jumps on turtles and eats mushrooms. But back in the 90s, something wild happened. Mario starred in a full-blown RPG, and it wasn't some lazy spin-off. Developed by Square, Super Mario RPG turned out to be one of the most creative games on the Super Nintendo. It kept the classic Mario charm, but threw him into a world filled with turn-based battles, stats, and a completely original story that didn't involve rescuing Peach from Bowser for the 100th time. One minute you're fighting living cake monsters at a wedding, the next, you're infiltrating a weapon factory that builds weapons for a mysterious villain who isn't Bowser. The game constantly throws unexpected scenarios at you, and somehow it all works. It feels like the developers were having a blast just seeing how far they could push Mario's universe while still keeping everything fun and charming. It's packed with little secrets, quirky NPCs, and bizarre moments that make it impossible to predict what's coming next. What made it stand out was the way it mixed traditional RPG mechanics with real-time button inputs during combat. You were timing attacks, blocking hits, and staying involved every second. It was flashy, fast-paced, and somehow still felt like a Mario game despite all the new mechanics. The humor was on point, the characters were unforgettable, and it introduced fan favorites like Geno and Mallow, who still get requested in games to this day. Super Mario RPG was also the spiritual foundation for what would later become the Paper Mario and Mario and Luigi series. But honestly, there's still something special about the original. The pixel art, the music, and the pacing make it one of those games that holds up decades later without needing any nostalgia goggles. If you're enjoying the ride so far, go ahead and hit that like button. It doesn't level you up, but it helps more than you think. Also, I want to hear from you. What's your favorite Super Nintendo RPG, and which ones do you think should show up in the next parts of this video? Comments help the algorithm show this video to more awesome people, and they keep the channel alive with fresh content. Plus, I check and reply to every single one. And hey, if you haven't subscribed yet, now's a great time, because I hear it unlocks +1 charisma in real life. Chrono Trigger isn't just a classic, it's the kind of game that reshaped what turn-based RPGs could be. Released at a time when most games were still trying to figure out how to tell a decent story, this one delivered time travel, multiple endings, and characters that actually felt alive. And it all worked perfectly thanks to a battle system that was miles ahead of its time. It took the familiar ATB setup from Final Fantasy VI and added smart tactical layers that made positioning and timing matter way more than usual. There are no random battles. You see enemies right on the map, and fights start instantly without any loading screens or transitions. Once the action kicks in, it's all about watching enemy positions and syncing your team's abilities. Some techs hit in straight lines, others in circles or around a single target, so where enemies move actually matters. And when you start unlocking double and triple techs between characters, things get wild. Pulling off a perfectly timed combo that wipes the field feels insanely satisfying. And it gives every fight a sense of rhythm and creativity that most turn-based games just don't have. The pacing is near flawless, and in just about 20 hours, Chrono Trigger delivers a journey that feels bigger than most games twice its length. From prehistoric jungles to post-apocalyptic wastelands, every era is packed with personality, stunning pixel art, and some of the best music ever composed for a 16-bit cartridge. The characters aren't just party members, they're fully realized personalities with their own arcs, motivations, and moments to shine. Whether it's the silent determination of Chrono, the kindness of Marley, or the redemption arc of Magus, every piece of the cast matters. More than 2 decades later, Chrono Trigger still holds up as one of the most polished, well-crafted games ever made. It's not nostalgia talking, it's just that good. And if you've somehow never played it, well, you're missing out on what might be the closest thing gaming has to perfection. Back in the 90s, Squaresoft was riding high on a wave of RPG hits, but instead of sticking to their usual formula, they did something unexpected. They handed the reins to a small American team. The result? Secret of Evermore. It might look like a cousin to Secret of Mana, but make no mistake, it's got its own weird charm. You control just one boy and his shape-shifting dog as they get tossed through bizarre worlds, from a prehistoric jungle to a sci-fi dystopia. What really sets it apart is the alchemy system. Instead of traditional magic, you mix ingredients you find in the world to cast spells. The combat is more grounded, a bit slower than Mana, but with tighter focus since it's just you and your dog against the world. Visually, it's darker too, not just in tone but in the environments, with creepy forests, gloomy castles, and weird tech labs that feel like they came out of an old B-movie. One of the coolest things about Evermore is how each area feels like a parody or tribute to classic movie genres. You've got a prehistoric zone that plays like a campy caveman flick, a medieval kingdom straight out of old-school fantasy, and even a futuristic city that feels like something pulled from a low-budget sci-fi film. It leans into that B-movie vibe with weird dialogue, over-the-top enemies, and tons of little nods to pulp adventure stories. That self-awareness gives the game personality. It knows it's weird, and it runs with it in the best way possible. Secret of Evermore is one of those oddball titles that flew under the radar for a lot of people. But for those who gave it a shot, it stood out as something totally different. Not better than Mana, but definitely not trying to be. Illusion of Gaia is one of those Super Nintendo RPGs that took a different route and made it work. Instead of the usual level-up system, it uses a unique mechanic where every time you clear a room of enemies, you get to upgrade one stat like attack, defense, or health, depending on the region. As you progress, the main character gains the ability to shift into different forms, each with their own unique abilities and playstyles. One form is a heavy hitter that trades speed for raw power, while another is more agile and can solve puzzles the regular form can't. Switching between them isn't just a gimmick. It's baked into the level design and enemy encounters. It adds a layer of strategy, especially in dungeons where knowing when to change forms can make the difference between barely surviving or cruising through. What really sets the game apart, though, is the world itself. While it's technically fictional, the game throws you into locations inspired by real-world landmarks like Egyptian pyramids, Inca ruins, and even the Great Wall of China. The vibe is darker than your typical colorful RPG, and the story isn't afraid to get weird or emotional. There's a sense of mystery running through the whole adventure that keeps you moving forward, even when the game doesn't hand you all the answers. For a game that looks like a typical 16-bit adventure, it isn't afraid to hit you with moments of loss, isolation, and sacrifice. Characters you meet along the way go through real struggles, and some of them don't get happy endings. There's a constant undertone of melancholy, like the world is beautiful but broken, and you're just trying to make sense of it all. It's one of those games that quietly sticks with you long after the credits roll, not because of any big twist, but because of the way it handles the quiet human moments. Dragon Quest V was one of those hidden gems that Western audiences had to wait way too long to play. It never made it out of Japan during the Super Nintendo era, which was sadly a common thing for the series back then. It wasn't until the Nintendo DS remake in 2009 that players outside Japan finally got to experience this classic. At first glance, it looks like a pretty standard turn-based RPG, but once you dive in, it hits different. Developed by Chunsoft for Enix, this game wasn't just about grinding levels and saving kingdoms. It introduced a surprisingly fun monster recruitment system. You could actually convince enemies to join your party after battles and build your team with creatures you'd normally be fighting against. That twist alone gave the game a layer of strategy and charm that most other RPGs at the time didn't have. But the real magic is in the story. Dragon Quest V follows your character from childhood into adulthood, letting you experience key moments of their life, including getting married and raising kids who eventually become party members. It's one of the first RPGs to feel like a full-life journey instead of just another hero's quest. The emotional weight of some scenes hits hard, especially as you watch the world change and your character grow with it. There's a moment where you actually have to choose who to marry, and it's not just a throwaway decision. Each option leads to different dialogue, interactions, and even affects the party dynamic with your future kids. It's a choice that sticks with you, not because of gameplay advantages, but because it feels real. The game doesn't treat it like a gimmick, it treats it like a part of your character's life. And for an RPG from the early 90s, that kind of emotional depth and player agency was way ahead of its time. Years later, the story was adapted into an animated film called Your Story, which you can find on Netflix. It's a decent watch, but honestly, nothing beats playing the real thing. Back in the 90s, most RPGs were all about castles, dragons, and magic swords. Then came Earthbound and flipped the script completely. Instead of fantasy kingdoms, you're in a suburban American town. Instead of knights and wizards, you play as a bunch of regular kids with baseball bats and psychic powers. The story kicks off with a meteor crashing near your hometown, and from that moment on, everything starts to spiral into the bizarre. You play as Ness, a quiet kid who suddenly finds himself wrapped up in a mission to stop an otherworldly evil spreading across the planet. Along the way, you team up with a shy genius, a girl with psychic powers, and a kid who shows up in a UFO. It looked silly at first glance, colorful, cartoony, even childish, but that was just the surface. Beneath all the goofy enemies and fart jokes was a story way deeper than people expected. It hit topics like fear of growing up, feeling out of place, and dealing with loss. One minute you're fighting a possessed pile of puke, and the next you're questioning your place in the universe. But one of the things that makes Earthbound so memorable is its offbeat visual style. It doesn't try to look epic or polished like other RPGs of the time. Instead, it leans into a weird, almost childlike aesthetic with flat colors, chunky sprites, and environments that feel just a little too much off. But that's the point. The game's look reinforces how surreal the world really is. Like you're seeing everything through the eyes of a kid, trying to make sense of something way bigger than him. Even the menus are strange, full of clunky old-school charm that somehow fits the vibe perfectly. Final Fantasy IV wasn't just another step forward for JRPGs, it was a full-on leap. This was one of the first times a role-playing game felt like a real story, not just a bunch of characters running around a map. It had drama, emotion, betrayal, and a villain like Golbez who wasn't just evil for the sake of it. He had depth. The story didn't waste time, it threw twists at you constantly. New characters would join, old ones would leave, allegiances would shift, the stakes kept climbing, and just when you thought you had the team figured out, the game would shake things up again. It gave everything a sense of momentum, like you were part of something much bigger, always pushing forward. But what made it stand out even more was the active time battle system. Instead of waiting your turn like a board game, battles were no longer purely turn-based, and instead gained a dynamic flow with the ATB system, where acting quickly actually made a difference. That small change made fights way more engaging and shaped how countless JRPGs would handle combat in the future. And then there's the cast. This was one of the first RPGs where you actually cared about your party. The game takes its time developing each character, giving them moments that feel personal and earned. Whether it's a quiet conversation, a tough decision, or a moment of sacrifice. These weren't just sprites on a screen anymore, they felt like real people. And one of the things that really pushed the emotion was how the game used music to tell the story. Each character had their own theme, and those tracks weren't just background, they were part of the moment. Whether it was a reunion, a betrayal, or something more tragic, the music knew exactly when to swell or fall silent. And for a 16-bit game, the emotional timing was surprisingly sharp. Alright, now it's your turn. What other Super Nintendo RPGs do you think deserve a spot in the next video? Drop a comment down below, I check and reply to every single one. Don't forget to leave a like if you had a good time, and hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet. More RPG goodness is on the way.